When the Legends Die, Chapter 48, Part 1. At first the sun felt comfortably warm, but as the rocks caught and reflected the heat, he began to feel scorched. His head began to ache and his eyes to burn, and his mouth felt parched. Thirst became a torture. He kept thinking of a small creek he had passed just before he found the place where the bear had made its kill. He should have drunk his fill then, but he didn't. He was hungry, too, but his belly didn't really demand food. He hadn't eaten since the previous morning, when his stomach had refused to keep the bad meat. But he had chewed twigs and a few dry berries, sucking but not swallowing them. He could fast, but the thirst was torture. He put a few pebbles in his mouth to suck on, but that was little help. Then he began to feel the cramping of his muscles, the tension of lying in one position. He tried to stretch his legs and made a noise among the dry twigs that had lodged among the rocks, and lay still again, enduring the aches. The afternoon slowly passed. Nothing came to the cache but a few magpies. They ate and squawked and flew away. Then the shadows crept across the opening. The sun slid down behind the shoulder of the mountain, and the quick chill of early autumn evening began to make itself felt. The rocks still held the midday heat, but as the first stars appeared, a cold breeze flowed down the mountainside like a chilly mist. He edged closer to the rocks to share their warmth. Night came, full darkness. He tried to remember where the moon stood in its cycle, whether it was early or late, and knew that he hadn't really seen the moon in a long time, didn't even know when it came to the full, and knew that was wrong, since a man should have a sense of time, a friendship with the moon, the sun, the earth. He looked up and saw familiar stars. At least he hadn't forgotten the stars he once knew. He waited, staring at the dark, shadowy mound of the cache. Nothing was there, nothing that moved. Staring at it, his eyes wearied, lost their focus. He looked at the trees, the clear line between the earth and sky, at the stars beyond, forcing his eyes to see. The chill made him shiver, and he hugged the rocks, and the warmth soothed him. He was very tired. He dozed, jerked himself awake, and fought the drowsiness. He tried to shift his position, crackled the dry twigs, and lay still again. He drifted into sleep. He didn't know how long he slept, but when he wakened and stared at the cache, he could see it clearly. Now there were shadows in the clearing, dim shadows, and he saw the moon, a starved, irregular half-moon. Reaching back, he knew that such a moon didn't rise till around midnight, and it was now at least an hour high, so it must be 1 o'clock or soon after. He looked at the cache again. It was undisturbed. The bear hadn't been there. He looked around the clearing, shifting his focus to ease his eyes. He waited, eyes open, senses alert, but nothing came. He drifted into weary half-sleep again, and thought he saw something move, knew it was an illusion. Only the moon shadows were there, moving inch by inch as the moon climbed the sky. Then something was there, just beyond him in the moonlight. He tensed, gripped his rifle, and knew it was not the bear. It was a woman. He couldn't quite make out her face, though he forced his eyes wide open to look. He still couldn't see her features, but he knew. Something deep inside him knew who she was. She was the mother, not his own mother, but the all-mother, the mothers and the grandmothers all the way back to the beginning. She was chanting, and her voice was both sad and pleading. Before he knew, he was chanting with her, but time after time he forgot the words of the chant before he came to the meaningful parts. He was singing softly as she sang, and at last he knew he was singing the bear chant. He closed his eyes and chanted, his voice now remembering all the words, and when he had finished the chant, he opened his eyes, and she was gone. Only the moon was there, directly overhead, and his voice went on singing as though apart from him. Then he saw the bear. It came out of the shadows among the trees, and it slowly crossed the opening, a few steps at a time, pausing to look and listen and nose the air. It was frosty in the moonlight. It was high in the shoulders, and its face was dished, not long and straight like a cinnamon bear's face. It came slowly toward the cache, then stopped and stared at the rocks where he was hidden. It lifted its massive head and smelled the air and uttered a throaty growl and shifted its forefeet, lifting one, then the other. He paused in his humming song, and the bear's ears stiffened, alert. It rumbled the deep growl again, took 2 steps towards the rock. He sang the low, humming song again, came to the meaningful part, sang it. The bear stopped, waited. Still humming the bear chant, he carefully raised his rifle, rested it against the rocks. His eyes tried to sight it, but the light was dim. Wait, he told himself, wait for light. And still humming the chant, he waited. And the bear turned away and went to the cache. It tossed the leaves and dirt aside with sweeps of its powerful paws and dragged the carcass into the open. It began to eat. He watched, and his humming slowly died away, but the beat was still in him like his own pulse. The bear paused in its eating from time to time and looked at the rocks, now accepting his silence as part of the night. His pulse drummed the beat of the chant, and time passed. First light of the dawn dimmed the stars overhead. The moon began to fade, and at last he knew he could see the rifle's sight clearly. It was time to kill. He pressed his cheek to the rifle stock, aimed low in the shoulder where the heart lay, close to the ribs. He tried to squeeze the trigger, but his fingers refused. He closed his eyes, fighting with himself. I came to kill the bear. His throbbing pulse asked, why? He answered, I must. And again his pulse beat, why? He answered, to be myself. And the pulse asked, who are you? And he had no answer. The pulse kept beating the question at him. Angrily he said, this bear has made trouble. And the question beat back, to whom? And his own bitter answer, to me. Then the question as before, who are you? And he having no answer he could face, said, whispering the words aloud, this bear did not make trouble. The trouble is in me. And he lowered the rifle. It was almost sunrise. The bear nosed the carcass, looked at the rocks, sniffed the air, lifted its lips and sniffed again. Then it turned and crossed the clearing to the trees whence it had come in the moonlight. He watched it go, and when it was gone he asked himself if he had seen a bear at all. Then he saw the open cache, the white bones of the carcass gleaming in the first sunlight. But as he looked at the rocks and trees and sky and earth, he felt like a stranger here. He waited, expecting the feeling to pass, but when he touched the rocks with his hands, they were cold and unfriendly. When he moved his cramped legs, the dry twigs made a harsh, rasping sound. When he got to his feet, a jay screamed at him, said he did not belong here. He rubbed life into his numb legs, left his hiding place, and went down the slope to the game trail. The bushes resented him. He went to the creek, and the rocks bruised his knees as he knelt to drink. The water was refreshing until he stood up again. Then it made him feel sick, weak from hunger, he told himself. He needed food. He would go back to the carcass, find scraps the bear had left. But his stomach nodded at the thought of meat that had lain in the sun all yesterday. I will kill my own meat, he said aloud. He sat and watched the deer run for a time, and nothing came. He got to his feet, started down the mountainside, hunting, and heard the noise of his stumbling footsteps, but was unable to silence them. He saw nothing to kill, found nothing to eat, not even dried berries he could suck for their scant juice. Even the twigs he plucked and chewed were bitter in his mouth. He went down the slope and across the valley, stumbling like a drunken man, knowing only that he must return to his own camp. He came to a creek and drank and rested among the unfriendly trees. Then it was afternoon, and he went on knowing he was a stranger, but knowing too that he must keep going. Dusk came, darkness deepened, and the stars appeared. He tried to find a star that he could guide by, and the stars wavered in the sky. He waited for them to settle into place again, and he heard the All-Mother singing the star chant, the chant to the night. He began to sing the chant with her, and after a little while the stars were clear again and steady in their places, he chose one to guide by, and he went on chanting the night chant. At last he was going up the long slope of Granite Peak, climbing through the brush and among the aspens and the pines that said silently that he was a stranger there. But he was still singing the star chant, though his voice was only a hoarse whisper, and the stars stayed in their places.